The mining station Kepler 442b hung in space like a broken toy, its hull cracked open and bleeding atmosphere into the void. Emergency lights flickered weakly through the transparent aluminum viewports, casting eerie shadows across the twisted metal corridors inside. What had once been a thriving operation extracting rare minerals from the asteroid field now looked like a graveyard of dreams and ambition. Captain Sarah. Chen pressed her face against the bridge viewport of the human cargo vessel Wandering Star, studying the damage through her tactical scanner. The distress signal had reached them 3 hours ago, cutting through subspace with desperate urgency. A Vorthak mining colony under attack by Krillian raiders, requesting immediate assistance from any ships in the sector. Most species would have calculated the risk and moved on. The Vorthak were a minor civilization, barely noticed by the Galactic Council. They had nothing to offer humanity in return for rescue. The Krillian raiders were notorious for their brutality and superior firepower. Any reasonable captain would have logged the distress call and continued on their route to the core worlds. But Sarah Chen was human, and humans had a reputation in the galaxy for making unreasonable decisions. "Ma'am, I'm reading 17 life signs still active aboard that station," reported Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. "But they're fading fast. Hull breach in sections C through F, and the Krillian ships are still in the area." "How many raiders?" Sarah asked, her voice calm despite the knot forming in her stomach. 3 light cruisers, standard Krillian configuration. They outgun us significantly." Torres paused, then added quietly, "Captain, we're a cargo hauler. We've got defensive weapons, but nothing that can stand up to military-grade firepower." Sarah nodded, her mind racing through possibilities. The Wandering Star was indeed just a cargo vessel, designed to carry supplies between human colonies. Her crew of 23 were skilled spacers, but they weren't soldiers. The smart play was to call for help and hope someone else would respond. Instead, she turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to the Krillian vessels." "Channel open, Captain." "Krillian ships, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Wandering Star. You are attacking a civilian mining operation. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came back in heavily accented Standard Galactic, dripping with amusement. "Little human cargo ship, you are far from your territory. Leave now and we will not add your hull to our collection." Sarah smiled grimly. "I'll take that as a refusal to negotiate." She cut the channel and turned to her crew. "All hands prepare for combat operations." "Engineering, how much can you push the engines?" Chief Engineer Martinez's voice crackled over the comm. "I can give you 120% for maybe 10 minutes before we start melting components. That'll have to do." "Weapons? Load our mining charges into the torpedo tubes. Navigation. Plot an intercept course for the closest raider." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of systems coming online. Sarah could feel the doubt radiating from her crew, but she also sensed their determination. Humans might be new to the galactic community, but they had already earned a reputation for unexpected tactics and stubborn loyalty. The Wandering Star accelerated toward the Krillian formation. Her cargo holds empty, but her spirit full of righteous anger. The lead raider, a sleek Predator-class cruiser, turned to meet them with weapons charging. "Incoming missile lock," Torres announced. "Evasive maneuvers. Return fire when we're in range." The space between the ships erupted in brilliant flashes as energy weapons and projectiles crossed the void. The Wandering Star shuddered under impact, her shields flaring and failing. But Sarah's plan wasn't to win a straight fight. "Now," she shouted. The cargo ship's mining charges, designed to crack asteroids, slammed into the Krillian vessel's engine section. The explosion was spectacular, sending the raider tumbling end over end with its propulsion systems completely destroyed. The other 2 Krillian ships converged on the Wandering Star, their weapons tearing through the cargo vessel's remaining shields. Sparks flew across the bridge as systems overloaded. "Hull breach on deck 3, someone reported. "We're losing atmosphere?" Sarah gripped her command chair as another salvo rocked the ship. They had maybe minutes before the Krillians finished them off. But those minutes might be enough. On the damaged mining station, 17 Vorthak survivors watched through cracked viewports as the human ship fought desperately against impossible odds. They had never seen anything like it. Most galactic species followed strict codes of conduct based on calculated self-interest, trade partnerships, mutual defense agreements, resource exchanges. Everything had a price and a purpose. But this human ship had responded to their distress call, with no expectation of reward, and now they were dying to protect complete strangers. Elder Thos, the ranking Vorthak on the station, activated his personal communicator with trembling claws. "Human vessel, please break off your attack. We are grateful for your attempt, but we cannot ask you to sacrifice yourselves for us." Captain Chen's voice came back immediately, steady despite the chaos around her. "With respect, Elder, that's not how humans work. We don't abandon people in need." The Wandering Star launched her remaining mining charges at the second Krillian cruiser, scoring hits that disabled its weapon systems. But the third raider had maneuvered behind them, charging its main guns for a killing blow. Then space lit up with new energy signatures. A human destroyer squadron dropped out of hyperspace, their weapon systems already locked on target. The lead ship, UHS Defiant, opened communications. "This is Commander Rodriguez of the Human Defense Force. Krillian vessels, you are interfering with a humanitarian rescue operation. Stand down immediately." The remaining Krillian ships, suddenly outgunned and outnumbered, retreated into hyperspace without another word. As rescue shuttles began ferrying the Vorthak survivors to safety, Elder Thos found himself aboard the Wandering Star's medical bay, receiving treatment for radiation exposure. Captain Chen sat beside his bed, her own arm in a sling from the battle. "Why?" Thos asked, his large eyes fixed on her face. "Your species had nothing to gain from helping us. We are few in number, poor in resources. Most civilizations would have left us to die." Sarah considered the question seriously. "In human culture, we have a saying. We judge ourselves not by how we treat the powerful, but by how we treat the powerless. You needed help, so we helped. It's really that simple." Elder Thos absorbed this philosophy so alien to galactic thinking. "And if we had died despite your efforts? Then at least you wouldn't have died alone." The Vorthak elder closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the concept. His people had been spacefaring for 3 centuries, but they had never encountered a species that would risk everything for strangers with no hope of repayment. As the rescue operations continued around them, neither Sarah nor Thos could imagine how this single act of human compassion would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The ripples were already beginning to spread, carrying word of humanity's strange and wonderful nature to the farthest reaches of known space. The Vorthak would remember this day, and their memory would prove to have consequences beyond anyone's imagination. The great crystal caverns of Vorth Prime had witnessed many councils over the millennia, but none quite like this one. Hundreds of Vorthak elders gathered in the natural amphitheater, their scaled skin shimmering in the bioluminescent light that emanated from the living walls. The air hummed with nervous energy as representatives from every colony, every ship, every settlement across Vorthak space came together to hear Elder Thos's testimony. At the center of the gathering, Thos stood before the Council of Voices, the governing body that had guided their people for over 2,000 years. His injuries from the mining station attack had healed, but the memory of what he had witnessed remained as vivid as the day it happened. "Honored elders," Thos began, his voice carrying clearly through the crystalline acoustics. "I come before you not merely to report on the destruction of mining station Kepler 442b, but to speak of something that challenges everything we understand about galactic civilization." A murmur rippled through the assembly. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy for their careful, methodical approach to politics and diplomacy. They had survived as a species by being cautious, by calculating every risk, by never acting without knowing the potential consequences. Sudden change made them nervous. Elder Korath, the ancient leader of the Council of Voices, raised one clawed hand for silence. Her scales had turned the pale gold of extreme age, and her eyes held the wisdom of centuries. "Speak your words, Thos of the Deep Mines. We listen with open minds." 3 cycles ago, when the Krillian raiders struck our station, 17 of our people faced certain death. Our distress call reached many ships, vessels from dozens of species passing through nearby space lanes. All of them calculated the risk and chose to continue on their journeys. All except one. Those activated a holographic display, showing the battle damage on the human cargo ship Wandering Star. The assembled elders gasped at the severity of the destruction. The vessel had clearly been outgunned and outmatched, yet it had engaged 3 military cruisers to protect strangers. "The humans came," Thos continued. "Not a military vessel, not a rescue ship designed for such operations. A simple cargo hauler with 23 crew members facing impossible odds. They knew they would likely die. They knew we could offer them nothing in return. They came anyway. Elder Vex of the northern colonies stood up, his voice skeptical. Perhaps they sought to curry favor with the Galactic Council? Humans are still relatively new to our community. Such a rescue might improve their standing among the established powers. I considered this possibility, Thos replied. But I have studied human culture extensively since that day. Their history is filled with such actions, performed long before they ever knew other species existed. They call it doing the right thing, and they seem to value it above their own survival. Another elder, Mira from the trading fleets, spoke up. This makes no evolutionary sense. Species that prioritize the welfare of strangers over their own survival should have been eliminated by natural selection long ago. Thos nodded. And yet here they are, not only surviving but thriving. In the 300 years since they achieved spaceflight, they have established colonies across 50 systems, developed technologies that rival the oldest civilizations, and built a society that somehow balances individual achievement with collective responsibility. The council chamber fell silent as the elders processed this information. The Vorthak understood cooperation. Their own species had thrived through careful alliances and mutual benefit agreements. But the concept of helping others without any expectation of return was alien to their thinking. Elder Korath leaned forward in her carved stone chair. What do you propose, Thos? Surely you did not call this gathering simply to praise human virtues. I propose that we forge a new kind of alliance, Thos said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Not a trade agreement or mutual defense pact based on calculated benefits. I propose that we offer ourselves as permanent allies to humanity, for the simple reason that a species capable of such selfless actions deserves our support. The reaction was immediate and intense. Dozens of elders began speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of debate that echoed through the crystal chambers. Some called the proposal madness. Others demanded detailed cost-benefit analyses. Still others worried about the precedent such an alliance might set. Elder Korath struck the great resonance crystal with her ceremonial staff, the pure tone cutting through the chaos and restoring order. This discussion will continue in proper fashion. Elder Thos, you speak of supporting humanity without expectation of return, but what if they ask nothing of us? What if they have no use for our friendship? Then we will offer it anyway, Thos replied. Just as they offered their lives for us without asking if we were worthy of their sacrifice. Over the following days, the debate raged through every level of Vorthak society. Their databases recorded every known human action, every diplomatic contact, every trade negotiation. What they found only reinforced Thos's testimony. Time and again, humans had acted against their apparent self-interest to help others. They had shared technology with less advanced species, provided aid during natural disasters, and refused profitable partnerships with civilizations that practiced slavery or oppression. The Vorthak archives, repositories of galactic knowledge dating back millennia, contained records of countless species and their behaviors. But nowhere in all that vast collection of data was there another example of a civilization that consistently chose moral action over material benefit. Elder Vex, initially the strongest opponent of Thos's proposal, found himself studying human military history with growing amazement. They have a concept called no one left behind, he reported to a gathering of senior council members. In battle, they will risk entire units to recover the body of a single fallen soldier, not for any tactical advantage, but simply because they believe their dead deserve proper burial. Elder Mira had been examining human trade records. Their economic system is equally puzzling. They regularly provide aid to developing worlds without requiring repayment. They have established charitable organizations that operate at a loss for centuries. By every rational measure, their society should have collapsed under the weight of such inefficiency. But perhaps the most compelling evidence came from Elder Sen of the Deep Archives, who had spent decades studying the rise and fall of galactic civilizations. In 3 million years of recorded history, she announced to the assembled council, we have documentation of 47 species that achieved spaceflight capability. Of those, 23 destroyed themselves through war or environmental devastation. 18 were conquered by more powerful neighbors. 5 exist in stagnant isolation, having lost the will to explore or grow. She paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle over the chamber. Only one species has not only survived, but actively worked to improve the lives of others while maintaining their own growth and vitality. The humans represent something unprecedented in galactic history. As the debate continued, word of the Vorthak deliberations began to spread beyond their homeworld. Other species, many of whom had had their own encounters with human unreasonableness, watched with interest. The galaxy had grown accustomed to predictable relationships based on mutual benefit and careful calculation. The idea that an entire species might choose loyalty over logic was both fascinating and disturbing to the established order. In the Great Crystal Chamber, Elder Korath called for the final vote. The decision would not just affect Vorthak human relations, it would establish a new kind of diplomacy based on principles rather than profit. As the elders cast their votes into the quantum matrix that would tally the results, Thus thought about Captain Sarah Chen and her crew. They were probably somewhere in human space right now, completely unaware that their simple act of decency was reshaping galactic politics. They had acted according to their nature, with no thought of the consequences their courage might unleash. The results appeared in glowing symbols above the assembly. Unanimous approval. For the first time in Vorthak history, they would offer alliance not because it was profitable, but because it was right. The precedent was set, the die was cast, and the galaxy would never be quite the same again. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stepped out of her transport onto the crystal platform of Vorth Prime's main spaceport, completely unprepared for what awaited her. As the ranking human diplomatic representative to the Vorthak Confederation, she had expected the usual formal reception, perhaps a small delegation of mid-level officials and a brief ceremony before getting down to the business of trade negotiations. Instead, she found herself facing thousands of Vorthak citizens lining the translucent walkways that led from the landing platform to the city center. Their scales rippled with colors she had never seen before, creating waves of brilliant hues that swept through the crowd like a living aurora. The sound they made was unlike anything in her diplomatic experience. Not quite singing, not quite humming, but something that seemed to resonate in her bones and make her heart race. Elder Thos approached her with measured steps, his ceremonial robes flowing behind him in the gentle artificial breeze that kept the spaceport atmosphere circulating. But there was nothing measured about his expression. His large, multifaceted eyes showed an intensity that Elena found both welcome and slightly overwhelming. "Ambassador Rodriguez," Thos said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd noise. "Welcome to Vorth Prime. On behalf of the entire Vorthak Confederation, I present to you our eternal gratitude and our pledge of unwavering alliance." Elena blinked, momentarily thrown off her diplomatic stride. She had been briefed on Vorthak customs, their careful protocols, their tendency toward formal and somewhat distant relationships with other species. This level of emotion was completely outside her experience with them. "Elder Thos," she replied, falling back on standard diplomatic language, "I'm honored by this reception and look forward to productive discussions about expanding trade relations between our peoples." Thos's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement in a human. "Ambassador, I fear there has been a misunderstanding. We did not invite you here to discuss trade. We invited you here to pledge ourselves as permanent allies to humanity, without condition or expectation of reciprocation." Elena felt her diplomatic training desert her entirely. In 30 years of interstellar relations, she had never encountered anything like this. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Alliance agreements require detailed negotiations about mutual benefits, defense obligations, resource sharing." "Yes," Thos interrupted gently. "That is how such things are normally done. But the Vorthak Confederation has decided to try something different, something human." Over the following hours, as Elena was escorted through the Crystal City to meet with the Council of Voices, she began to understand the magnitude of what was happening. The Vorthak had not simply decided to ally with humanity. They had fundamentally altered their approach to galactic relationships based on their observation of human behavior. The briefing documents they provided her painted a picture that was both flattering and terrifying. Detailed analyses of human actions across dozens of systems, psychological profiles of human decision-making patterns, historical studies that traced human behavior from their pre-spaceflight era to the present. The Vorthak had clearly spent enormous resources studying humanity, and their conclusions were startling. Your species, Elder Korath explained as they met in the council chambers, represents something unique in galactic civilization. We have identified 47 documented cases of humans risking their lives to help other species with no possibility of material gain. This pattern of behavior is unprecedented. Elena tried to maintain her professional composure, but she could feel the weight of expectation in the room. With respect, Elder Korath, I think you may be idealizing us. Humans are capable of great kindness, but we're also capable of selfishness, cruelty, and short-sighted thinking. We're not perfect. We are not looking for perfection, Thos interjected. We are looking for hope. For 3,000 years, galactic civilization has operated on the principle that every action must serve calculated self-interest. Trade what you have for what you need. Defend only what serves your survival. Trust only those who profit from your success. This system has brought stability, but it has also brought stagnation. He activated a holographic display showing the current political map of known space. Hundreds of species were represented, their territories marked in different colors, connected by thin lines representing formal alliances and trade agreements. But Elena noticed something strange about the pattern. Despite thousands of years of contact between species, the connections were remarkably limited. Most civilizations had formal relationships with only their immediate neighbors, and even those were clearly transactional in nature. We have been watching humanity for only a few decades, Elder Korath continued, but already we see something different. Human trade delegations that share technology freely. Human explorers who risk their ships to investigate distress calls from unknown sources. Human colonies that accept refugees from other species without demanding compensation. Elena found herself in the strange position of arguing against her own species' virtues. But surely you see the risks in such behavior? Resources spent helping others are resources not available for your own people's needs. Trust given freely can be exploited by those with malicious intent. Yes, Thos agreed, and yet humanity continues to grow stronger while maintaining these apparently inefficient practices. Your colonies are among the most prosperous in known space. Your technology advances at a rate that amazes older civilizations. Your people report higher levels of satisfaction with their lives than any other species we have studied. The implications began to sink in as Elena realized what the Vorthak were really proposing. They weren't just offering an alliance. They were offering to fundamentally change how they interacted with the galaxy, using humanity as their model. But the full scope of what was happening only became clear when she received an encrypted message from Earth during her second day on Vorth Prime. Intelligence reports indicated that the Vorthak weren't the only ones paying attention to human behavior. At least 12 other species had initiated formal studies of human society in the past 6 months. Trade delegations from species that had never shown interest in humanity were suddenly requesting meetings. 3 separate civilizations had submitted formal requests to establish permanent embassies in human space. More intriguingly, there were reports of behavioral changes among species that had observed human actions firsthand. The Calarian Republic had recently provided disaster relief to a neighboring system without requiring payment, something unprecedented in their 1,000-year history. The Zephyrian Trade Federation had begun including humanitarian aid clauses in their commercial agreements. Even the notoriously isolationist Drexy had opened their borders to refugees from a recent war, citing new perspectives on interspecies cooperation. Elena found herself in the unique position of representing not just her own government, but apparently serving as an example of something the galaxy had never seen before. The pressure was enormous, but there was also something deeply moving about the hope she saw in Vorthak eyes whenever they looked at her. You understand, she said to Thos during one of their private meetings, that if we accept this alliance, we'll be held to an impossible standard? Every human action will be scrutinized for evidence that we're worthy of the faith you're placing in us. Thos considered this carefully. Ambassador, my people spent 3 cycles studying your species before making this decision. We examined your failures as well as your successes. We know about human conflicts, human prejudices, human mistakes. We are not asking you to be perfect. We are asking you to continue being human. That evening, Elena sat alone in her guest quarters, looking out through the crystal walls at the bioluminescent gardens below. Her secure communicator showed 17 incoming messages from various departments on Earth, all requesting immediate consultation on how to handle this unprecedented situation. But as she watched Vorthak families moving through the gardens below, their scales shifting through calm, content colors in the peaceful light, she began to understand that this was about more than diplomacy. The galaxy was watching to see if there really was an alternative to the careful, calculated relationships that had defined interstellar civilization for millennia. Whether humanity was ready or not, they had become a symbol of something new. The question now was whether they could live up to the hope that was being placed in them, and what would happen to galactic civilization if they succeeded, or if they failed. As she began composing her report to Earth, Elena realized that the words she chose in the coming days might reshape the future of every intelligent species in known space. No pressure at all. The Galactic Council's emergency session had been called with unusual haste, and the atmosphere in the massive chamber reflected the uncertainty that was spreading through established diplomatic channels. Representatives from 147 species filled the curved tiers of seats that spiraled up from the central debate floor, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity that had taken millennia to assemble. At the center of attention sat Chancellor Vexhai of the Centaurian Alliance, a species known for their calculating approach to politics and their traditional role as moderators in galactic affairs. His forearms gestured slowly as he addressed the assembly, each movement carefully controlled to project calm authority, despite the unprecedented nature of the crisis they faced. Honored representatives, Chancellor Vexhai began, his synthesized voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. We gather today to address a phenomenon that threatens the fundamental principles upon which galactic civilization has been built for over 50,000 years. A holographic display materialized above the assembly, showing a map of known space with glowing indicators marking recent diplomatic developments. The pattern was unmistakable. Species after species was breaking from traditional alliance structures, abandoning carefully negotiated trade agreements, and pursuing what intelligence reports could only describe as humanitarian initiatives. In the past 18 months, the Chancellor continued, we have witnessed the collapse of 17 major trade cartels, the dissolution of 3 defense pacts that had maintained stability for centuries, and the emergence of at least 32 new cooperative agreements that appear to operate outside normal economic principles. Representative Kortham of the Draconian hegemony, a species whose military might had dominated their local sector for 2 millennia, stood to address the assembly. Her scaled form towered above the speaking platform, and her voice carried the authority of countless conquered worlds. This infection, spreading through galactic civilization, can be traced to a single source, she declared, her words heavy with disdain. The humans and their primitive concept of altruism are destroying the order that has kept peace among our species. A murmur ran through the assembly, but it was not entirely one of agreement. Representative Talara of the Aquatic Confederacy spoke from her mobile environmental chamber, her melodic tones creating harmony, even as her words challenged the draconian position. With respect to my colleague from the hegemony, the changes we are witnessing may not represent destruction, but evolution. The Aquatic Confederacy has recently partnered with human medical researchers to develop treatments for genetic disorders that affect 17 different species. Our scientists report levels of innovation and cooperation they have never before experienced. And what did humanity ask in return for this cooperation? Demanded Kortham. Talara's reply sent ripples of surprise through the chamber. Nothing. They shared their research freely and asked only that we do the same with any species that might benefit from the treatments. The debate that followed revealed the true scope of what was happening throughout the galaxy. The Calarian Republic described how human traders had helped them develop new agricultural techniques that had ended a famine affecting 12 worlds, refusing all payment except the promise that the techniques would be shared with other species facing food shortages. The Zephyrian Trade Federation spoke of human engineers who had volunteered to help repair critical infrastructure damaged in a recent natural disaster, working without compensation for months until the systems were fully operational. But perhaps most significantly, representative after representative stood to describe how their own species had begun adopting what they called human-style diplomacy in their dealings with other civilizations. The careful calculations of benefit and risk that had dominated galactic politics for millennia were giving way to something unprecedented. Actions taken because they were morally right rather than economically profitable. Chancellor Vexhai called for order as the debate threatened to devolve into chaos. The question before us is not whether these changes are philosophically appealing, but whether they represent a threat to galactic stability. Our intelligence services report that some species are beginning to question the authority of their own governments, demanding that their leaders adopt more humanitarian policies. This was the heart of the crisis, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The established order of galactic civilization was built on the principle that rational self-interest would naturally lead to stable relationships between species. Governments that prioritize their own citizens' welfare above all else could be trusted to act predictably in diplomatic situations. But if species began prioritizing the welfare of others, if they started making decisions based on moral principles rather than calculated benefits, the entire system of interstellar relations would become chaotic and unpredictable. Representative Quindar of the Silicon-based collective offered a different perspective. Perhaps the question is not whether these changes threaten stability, but whether our current definition of stability is worth preserving. In the past 50,000 years, we have achieved a form of peace through careful balance of power and mutual assured deterrence, but it is a cold peace, one that has prevented war primarily by making cooperation so limited that there is little worth fighting over. He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed comparative data on technological advancement, cultural exchange, and quality of life measurements across different regions of space. In the 18 months since species began adopting human-influenced policies, we have seen more collaborative innovation than in the previous 5 centuries combined. Medical breakthroughs, technological advances, artistic achievements, all emerging from the kind of unrestricted cooperation that our traditional systems actively discouraged. The debate continued for hours, but gradually a pattern emerged in the testimonies. Species that had embraced cooperation without immediate reciprocal benefit were reporting unexpected advantages. Their scientists were making breakthrough discoveries through collaborative research. Their artists were creating new forms of expression through cultural exchange. Their citizens were reporting higher levels of satisfaction and purpose. Most remarkably, these species were also proving to be more resilient in the face of crises. When the Meridian system had been struck by a cosmic radiation burst that threatened all life in the region, the response had been unprecedented. Rather than the usual careful negotiations about who would provide aid and what they would receive in return, dozens of species had immediately dispatched assistance. The evacuation and reconstruction efforts had been completed in a fraction of the time that traditional diplomatic channels would have required. As the session drew to a close, Chancellor Vexhai found himself in the unprecedented position of presiding over a fundamental challenge to everything galactic civilization had stood for. It appears, he said slowly, that we face a choice between maintaining the stability of our current system and embracing an entirely new model of interspecies relations. Representative Kortham made one final attempt to rally support for the traditional approach. And if this human-influenced idealism leads to chaos? If species begin making decisions based on emotion rather than logic? If the careful balance of power that has prevented major conflicts for millennia collapses into anarchy? But her words carried less conviction than they had at the session's beginning. Around the chamber, representatives were engaged in quiet conversations with their neighbors, discussing possibilities that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The rigid hierarchy of galactic politics was already beginning to shift, and everyone could feel it. The session ended without formal resolution, but the very fact that such a debate had taken place sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels across known space. For the first time in recorded galactic history, an entire chamber full of rational, calculating species had seriously discussed abandoning self-interest as the primary motivator for international relations. As representatives filed out of the chamber, many were already planning communications with human diplomatic missions, not to negotiate traditional trade agreements or defense pacts, but to learn more about this strange philosophy that seemed to make everyone who adopted it stronger rather than weaker. The humans, still unaware of their growing influence, continued to act according to their nature, helping where help was needed, sharing what they had learned, and treating every species they encountered as potentially worthy of friendship, rather than merely useful for trade. The galaxy was changing, one act of inexplicable kindness at a time. The distress signal that reached Human Space Command at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning was unlike anything in their emergency protocols. It came from the edge of the Andromeda Transit Corridor, a region of space so remote that only the most desperate or foolhardy travelers attempted passage through its treacherous gravitational anomalies. Admiral Marcus Webb stood before the massive tactical display in Fleet Command's primary operations center, studying the data with growing concern. The signal was fragmented, broken by interference from the corridor's unstable space-time distortions, but the automated translation subroutines had managed to piece together enough to paint a terrifying picture. 17 ships, mixed species, reported Commander Sarah Okafor, the duty intelligence officer. The convoy was transporting refugees from the Zerion system before it went supernova. According to the partial transmission, their main convoy escort suffered critical engine failure while transiting the corridor. They're trapped in a gravity well with insufficient power to escape. Admiral Webb frowned at the tactical projection. How many souls are we talking about? Best estimate is 43,000, sir. Men, women, children from at least 8 different species. The convoy was one of the last evacuation fleets to make it out before Zerion's star collapsed. The Admiral felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. 43,000 lives hanging in the balance, trapped in one of the most dangerous regions of known space. The Andromeda Transit Corridor was notorious for claiming ships that ventured too far from established safe routes. Rescue operations in that area had a mortality rate approaching 90%. What's our nearest asset? He asked. Commander Okafor consulted her displays. The UHS determination is 18 hours out, but sir, she's a single heavy cruiser. The corridor's gravitational distortions would make it nearly impossible for one ship to extract a convoy of that size, even if they could reach them safely. Webb nodded grimly. The mathematics of the situation were brutal. Even if they dispatched their entire local fleet, the chances of a successful rescue were minimal. The smart play would be to launch a reconnaissance mission, document what happened for future safety protocols, and write a respectful memorial for the 43,000 lives that would be lost. That was what any rational military commander would do. That was what the operational manuals recommended. That was what every other species in the galaxy would expect. But Admiral Webb was human, and humans had a reputation for making unreasonable decisions. Signal the determination to proceed to the corridor's edge, but maintain safe distance, he ordered. Then get me a full tactical analysis of every ship within 50 light-years. I want options even if they seem impossible. Over the next 6 hours, as the tragic situation in the Andromeda Transit Corridor became known throughout human space, something unprecedented began to happen. The first response came from the cargo vessel Lucky Strike, whose captain volunteered his ship and crew for the rescue mission, despite having no military training and minimal defensive capabilities. Then the passenger liner Stellar Dream diverted from her scheduled route, offering her advanced medical facilities for refugee treatment. By hour 12, Admiral Webb found himself coordinating not just a military rescue operation, but a spontaneous humanitarian fleet comprising over 200 vessels, military ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, private yachts, research vessels. Every type of spacecraft in human space was volunteering for a mission that had almost no chance of success. The response baffled outside observers who monitored human communications. The refugees were not human citizens. Most were from species that had limited diplomatic contact with humanity. There was no strategic value to be gained from their rescue, no political advantage to be won. By every rational calculation, the risk far outweighed any possible benefit. But the volunteers kept coming. Captain Elena Vasquez of the research vessel Discovery transmitted a message that would later be studied by xenosociologists across the galaxy. Admiral, we know the odds. We know this might be a suicide mission, but we also know that 43,000 people are going to die unless someone tries to help them. That's all the reason we need. The rescue fleet assembled at the edge of the Andromeda Transit Corridor looked like something from a child's imagination rather than a serious military operation. Massive cargo ships flew alongside tiny private craft. Luxury passenger liners formed up with battle-scarred military cruisers. Scientific research vessels packed with emergency medical supplies took positions next to mining ships hastily retrofitted with refugee accommodations. Admiral Webb, commanding from the flagship Indomitable, surveyed his impossible fleet and felt a mixture of pride and terror. Pride at what humanity was capable of when faced with others' suffering. Terror at the responsibility he now carried for not just the trapped refugees, but for the thousands of volunteers who had risked everything to help complete strangers. The entry into the corridor was a nightmare of gravitational shear and spatial distortions that twisted reality itself. Ships that strayed even slightly from the calculated safe route were torn apart by forces that exceeded their structural tolerances. The Braveheart, a small cargo vessel, was lost in the first hour when her captain attempted to reach a refugee ship that had drifted from the main convoy. 23 volunteers died instantly when their vessel was crushed by conflicting gravitational fields. But the fleet pressed on. The Vorthak ship Crystal Harmony had been part of the refugee convoy, carrying 3,000 evacuees from their destroyed colony world. When the human rescue fleet finally reached the trapped vessels after 36 hours of careful navigation, Captain Tholar found himself staring in disbelief at the approaching armada. "Human vessels," he transmitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "Why have you come? We have nothing to offer you. No way to repay such a risk." Admiral Webb's response became legendary throughout the galaxy. "Captain, the universe is vast and cold and empty. The only warmth in it comes from the bonds between thinking beings who choose to care for one another. We came because you needed help, and that's reason enough." The extraction operation took another 18 hours of delicate maneuvering. Ships were linked together in chains, their combined engines barely sufficient to overcome the gravitational forces that held them trapped. Several human vessels sustained critical damage, transferring refugees from the most compromised ships. The passenger liner Golden Dream suffered total engine failure after taking on 6,000 evacuees beyond her rated capacity. When the last refugee ship finally broke free of the corridor's gravitational prison, the human rescue fleet had lost 11 vessels and 247 crew members. But they had saved 42,738 lives from 8 different species. The refugees who survived would scatter across the galaxy, but they carried with them a story that would reshape interstellar relations forever. They spoke of humans who had crossed the most dangerous region of known space, not for profit or political advantage, but simply because it was the right thing to do. They described volunteers who had given their lives to save people they had never met, from species they barely knew existed. More importantly, they carried with them a new understanding of what was possible when thinking beings chose cooperation over calculation, compassion over cold logic. The Galactic Council's emergency session following the Andromeda Transit Corridor rescue was markedly different from the previous debates about human influence. This time there was no question about the reality of humanity's impact on galactic civilization. The question was what to do about it. Representative Kortham of the Draconian Hegemony, previously humanity's strongest critic, found herself in the unexpected position of defending their actions. "Whatever we may think of their methods," she admitted to the Assembly, "we cannot deny the results. 43,000 lives saved by volunteers who asked for nothing in return. This level of cooperation would have been impossible under our traditional diplomatic frameworks. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Representative Tholar of the Vorthak Confederation stood to address the Assembly, still bearing the injuries he had sustained during the rescue operation. He spoke with quiet intensity about what he had witnessed. "Honored representatives, I have seen the future of galactic civilization, and it does not look like anything we have built in the past 50,000 years. It looks like 200 ships from a single species risking everything to help strangers. It looks like volunteers, giving their lives so that children from worlds they have never visited might live to see another day." His words hung in the chamber's silence as representatives from across the galaxy contemplated a future where such actions might become normal rather than exceptional. The test had been passed, but the real challenge was just beginning. The shadow meeting took place in the depths of Terminus Station, a massive orbital facility that existed in the neutral space between 3 major galactic powers. Built from dark metal and older than most civilizations, the station served as a gathering point for those who preferred their business conducted away from the scrutinizing eyes of the Galactic Council. In a chamber shielded from all forms of electronic surveillance, representatives from 12 of the galaxy's most powerful military and economic factions sat around a hexagonal table carved from a single piece of asteroid rock. No official records would be kept of this meeting. No diplomatic channels would acknowledge that it had ever taken place. General Vaktar of the Hegemony Strike Forces activated the room's final privacy protocols, ensuring that not even quantum entanglement could breach their security. His forearms moved with mechanical precision as he addressed the assembly, his synthesized voice cutting through the chamber's artificial silence. "The situation has reached a critical threshold," he began, displaying holographic data that painted a stark picture of galactic transformation. In the 18 months since the Andromeda Corridor incident, 67 major civilizations have formally adopted what they term humanitarian protocols in their diplomatic frameworks. Traditional alliance structures are collapsing. Trade cartels that have maintained stability for millennia are dissolving in favor of cooperative agreements that ignore economic fundamentals. Fleet Admiral Drexhai of the Corporate Systems Alliance leaned forward, her metallic exoskeleton glinting in the chamber's dim lighting. "The economic implications are catastrophic. My analysts project total collapse of traditional market structures within 5 years if this trend continues. Species are sharing technology freely, providing resources without compensation, engaging in cooperative research that undermines competitive advantages." The data she presented showed a galaxy in economic chaos. Profit margins that had been stable for centuries were evaporating as species began prioritizing social benefit over financial gain. Military contractors were losing contracts as former enemies began resolving disputes through mediation, rather than force. Entire industries built around scarcity and competition were becoming obsolete as civilizations embraced abundance and cooperation. But it was Admiral Kortham who spoke, the words that everyone in the chamber was thinking. "This is not simply an economic crisis. This is an existential threat to the natural order of civilization itself. The humans have introduced a philosophical virus that is destroying the logical foundations of interstellar society." Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. These were beings who had built their power on the principle that intelligent species would naturally pursue their own interests above all else. Their military might, economic dominance, and political influence all depended on a galaxy where cooperation was limited and trust was carefully calculated. The human concept of unconditional assistance to others threatened to make all of that irrelevant. "We have attempted conventional responses," reported Chancellor Kexter of the financial hegemony, economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, trade sanctions. "All have failed because the humans and their allies no longer base their decisions on traditional cost-benefit analyses. They cannot be coerced through threats to their material welfare because they consistently prioritize abstract principles over concrete benefits." General Vaktar activated another holographic display, this one showing military assessments of human capabilities. Direct military action has also proven ineffective. Human defense forces fight with a coordination and determination that our strategists describe as irrational. They accept casualty rates that would cause any sensible species to surrender, and they treat the defense of their allies as equivalent to defending their own homeworlds. The assessment painted a picture of humanity that was deeply troubling to the assembled powers. Human forces were not significantly superior in terms of technology or numbers, but they fought as if every battle carried the weight of moral imperative. They refused to abandon positions when retreat would be tactically sound. They launched rescue missions into hostile territory to recover single wounded soldiers. They shared their best military technology with allied species, apparently unconcerned that such knowledge might someday be used against them. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to inspire similar behavior in their allies. Species that had maintained reasonable, calculating approaches to warfare for millennia were suddenly fighting with human-like determination when defending cooperative agreements and humanitarian principles. "The infection is spreading faster than we anticipated," admitted Dr. Velran, the Corporate Alliance's chief xenopsychologist. "Our models predicted that species adopting human-style diplomacy would quickly discover the inherent inefficiency of such approaches and return to more logical frameworks. Instead, we are seeing the opposite effect. Species that embrace cooperation without reciprocal benefit report increased innovation, higher citizen satisfaction, and greater resilience in the face of crises. This was perhaps the most infuriating aspect of the human phenomenon for the assembled powers. By every rational model, civilizations that prioritized the welfare of others over their own interests should have become weak and vulnerable. Instead, they were becoming stronger. Admiral Drexhigh pulled up economic data from the Vorthak Confederation, now humanity's strongest ally. Since adopting human-influenced policies, the Vorthak have experienced unprecedented technological advancement, expanded their territorial boundaries by 30%, and established formal relationships with 47 species that previously showed no interest in diplomatic contact. Their citizens report the highest quality of life indicators in their recorded history. Similar patterns were emerging throughout human-influenced space. The Calarian Republic had solved chronic resource shortages through cooperative agreements that would have been impossible under traditional diplomatic frameworks. The Zephyrian Trade Federation had transformed from a minor commercial power into a major force for interstellar cooperation. Dozens of smaller species that had existed on the margins of galactic civilization were now thriving as part of humanitarian alliance networks. General Vaktar stood and began pacing around the chamber, his movements betraying an agitation that was rare among his species. We face a fundamental question. Do we allow this transformation to continue until it renders our traditional power structures obsolete? Or do we take decisive action to preserve the natural order of galactic civilization? The implications of decisive action were clear to everyone in the room. They were discussing nothing less than a coordinated campaign to destroy human influence before it could spread further. Economic warfare, political sabotage, and, if necessary, military intervention to prevent humanity's philosophical virus from infecting the rest of the galaxy. But Fleet Admiral Drexhigh raised a concern that gave the entire assembly pause. Our intelligence suggests that any action against humanity would trigger an unprecedented defensive response from their allies. The Vorthak have pledged their entire military to human defense. The Calarian Republic has made similar commitments. We could find ourselves facing not just human forces, but a coalition of species fighting with human-inspired determination. Dr. Velron added another troubling dimension to the discussion. Moreover, our own populations are beginning to show signs of human influence. We have documented cases of individual citizens in our own territories questioning why their governments do not provide aid to struggling species, why they do not engage in the kind of cooperative research that has proven so beneficial elsewhere. The shadow that had brought them together was spreading even into their own ranks. Chancellor Kekstar presented the final piece of the puzzle with grim satisfaction. However, we have identified a potential weakness in the human approach. Their commitment to helping others without regard for reciprocal benefit could be exploited. If we create a crisis large enough to require truly massive resource commitment, we might be able to prove that human-style cooperation is ultimately unsustainable. The plan that emerged from their discussions was elegant in its simplicity and terrible in its scope. They would engineer a series of crises across multiple systems, each requiring the kind of humanitarian response that humans could not ignore. Artificial disasters, staged conflicts, manufactured shortages, all designed to drain human resources and demonstrate the fundamental weakness of a philosophy based on unlimited assistance to others. If humanity and their allies committed the resources necessary to address these manufactured crises, they would bankrupt themselves and prove that cooperation without reciprocity was indeed unsustainable. If they failed to respond, they would be revealed as hypocrites whose humanitarian principles applied only when convenient. As the shadow meeting concluded, the assembled powers believed they had found a way to restore the natural order of galactic civilization. They failed to consider that they were not dealing with rational actors who would make decisions based on cost-benefit analysis. They were dealing with humans who had a long history of doing impossible things simply because they believed those things were right. But the first crisis erupted without warning in the Kepler 425 system, where a sudden cascade failure in the planet's atmospheric processors threatened to suffocate 12 million aquatic Confederation citizens within 72 hours. The second crisis followed just 6 hours later, as seismic weapons hidden in the crust of 3 Calarian worlds triggered simultaneous earthquakes that devastated major population centers. By the third day, 7 more disasters had struck across human-allied space with suspicious precision and timing. In the emergency command center on Earth, Admiral Webb found himself coordinating humanity's response to what could only be described as a systematic attempt to overwhelm their humanitarian commitments. The holographic displays around him showed a galaxy in crisis, with distress calls arriving faster than they could be processed. "Status report," he ordered, though he already knew the numbers would be staggering. Commander Okafor's voice was tight with exhaustion as she rattled off the statistics. 47 systems requesting immediate assistance. Total population at risk, approximately 230 million beings across 18 different species. Our entire merchant fleet is committed. Every military vessel is deployed, and we're still looking at resource requirements that exceed our capacity by 400%. Around the command center, staff officers worked frantically to coordinate a response that seemed increasingly impossible. The disasters were spread across such vast distances that even with faster-than-light travel, simply reaching all the affected systems would strain humanity's capabilities beyond the breaking point. But Admiral Webb was beginning to recognize the pattern behind the chaos. "These aren't random disasters," he said quietly. "The timing, the distribution, the specific types of emergencies, someone is orchestrating this." The realization sent a chill through the command center. If the crises were artificial, then humanity and their allies were facing not just a series of disasters, but a coordinated attack designed to exploit their most fundamental values. The enemy had weaponized their own compassion against them. "Sir," Commander Okafor reported, "we're receiving a transmission from General Vaktar of the Hegemony Strike Forces. He's requesting a private conference." Admiral Webb nodded grimly. "Put him through." The holographic projection that materialized showed the four-armed military leader in what appeared to be a command chamber aboard his flagship. His synthesized voice carried a tone of false sympathy that made Webb's jaw clench. "Admiral Webb, I trust you are aware of the various crises affecting your allied territories. The Hegemony would like to offer our assistance in resolving these unfortunate situations." "What kind of assistance?" Webb asked carefully. "We have significant resources, ships, equipment, personnel, that could be made available immediately. Our response teams could reach the affected systems within hours rather than days. We ask only for reasonable compensation for our services, and perhaps some diplomatic adjustments to reflect the new reality of galactic relations." The offer was smooth, professional, and utterly predictable. Webb could see the trap clearly now. Accept the help and acknowledge that human-style cooperation was ultimately dependent on traditional power structures. Refuse the help and watch hundreds of millions die to preserve abstract principles. "I appreciate the offer, General, but humanity and our allies will handle these crises ourselves." Vaktar's expression didn't change, but Webb caught the slight pause that suggested surprise. "Admiral, surely you cannot be serious. The scope of these disasters exceeds your response capabilities by several orders of magnitude. Accepting assistance is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of rational leadership." "Thank you for your concern, General. Earth out." As the connection terminated, Webb found himself facing the most difficult decision of his career. He could feel the weight of 230 million lives pressing down on him, and he knew that conventional mathematics said those lives could not be saved without outside assistance. But he also knew that surrender to conventional mathematics would mean the end of everything humanity had built in the galaxy. "Get me a priority channel to all human territories," he ordered. "Emergency frequency, maximum distribution." When the channel opened, Admiral Webb found himself addressing not just military personnel and government officials, but ordinary citizens across dozens of worlds. His words would be heard in homes and workplaces, schools and spaceports, wherever humans had built their communities among the stars. "Citizens of humanity," he began, "we face a test unlike any in our history. Across the galaxy, our friends and allies are dying while we watch. The resources required to save them exceed our official capabilities. Conventional wisdom says we should accept help from those who offer it, regardless of their motives." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "But we are not a conventional species. We are the people who crossed impossible oceans to reach new continents. We are the descendants of those who looked at the stars and decided to visit them. We are humans, and we do not abandon our friends." What happened next would be studied by sociologists and historians for generations to come. Within hours of Admiral Webb's broadcast, the response began. Not from military commands or government agencies, but from ordinary people who decided that impossible mathematics were not their problem. The cargo ship Lucky Break was supposed to be carrying luxury goods to the Centauri colonies. Instead, Captain Maria Santos diverted her vessel to the Kepler 425 system, her holds filled with atmospheric processors donated by 3 separate manufacturing companies. The passenger liner Star Dreams canceled her scheduled cruise to ferry medical teams to the earthquake zones in Calarian space. A mining consortium in the Vega system contributed their entire orbital infrastructure to manufacture emergency shelters. But it wasn't just human vessels that responded. The Vorthak Confederation deployed their entire civilian fleet, stripping their own worlds of emergency reserves to help species they had never directly interacted with before. Calarian survivors, still digging out from the artificial earthquakes, sent what few ships they had available to assist other crisis zones. The Aquatic Confederation, fighting for their own survival on Kepler 425, nevertheless provided their advanced medical technology to treat casualties from the other disasters. The response that emerged was unlike anything seen in galactic history. Species that had been enemies for centuries found themselves working side by side in rescue operations. Civilian vessels retrofitted themselves for humanitarian missions with equipment donated by former competitors. Research institutes shared decades of classified technology to develop new solutions for unprecedented problems. In the shadow chamber where the crisis had been orchestrated, the assembled powers watched their carefully planned assault collapse into something they had never anticipated. Dr. Velran stared at the data streams in disbelief. The resource commitment is sustainable, she reported to the stunned gathering. Somehow they're not just maintaining their response capabilities, they're expanding them. Voluntary contributions are arriving faster than the disasters can consume them. General Vaktar reviewed the tactical displays with growing alarm. This is impossible. No civilization can maintain this level of resource expenditure without economic collapse. But Fleet Admiral Drexhai had identified the flaw in their understanding. They're not expenditures, she said quietly. Every ship they send, every piece of equipment they provide, every volunteer who risks their life, it all comes back multiplied. The species they help become part of their network. The innovations they develop get shared across their entire alliance. They're not spending resources, they're investing them. The final blow to the Shadow conspiracy came when the Vorthak Confederation publicly announced the discovery of artificial seismic weapons on the Calarian worlds. Elder Thos, now serving as the Confederation's military liaison, transmitted his findings to the Galactic Council with devastating clarity. We have identified the parties responsible for manufacturing these weapons, he announced to the full assembly. We have traced the supply chains, decoded the communications protocols, and documented the coordination between multiple military powers. This was not a series of natural disasters. This was an attempt to destroy the philosophy of cooperation through engineered suffering. The revelation sent shockwaves through galactic civilization that made the original human influence seem minor by comparison. Species that had remained neutral in the growing philosophical divide suddenly found themselves forced to choose sides. The shadow powers had revealed themselves through their own actions, and the galaxy recoiled from what they saw. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Representative Kortham of the Draconian hegemony stood before the Galactic Council and spoke words that would reshape interstellar relations forever. I served the old order because I believed it represented strength, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. I opposed human influence because I thought it represented weakness. I was wrong. Strength is not the ability to take what you want from others. Strength is the ability to give what others need.